Gregor?
Gregor, are you unwell?
Gregor!
Psychoanalysis on William Wilson by Edgar Allan Poe, The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman, and Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka. William Wilson is a short story written by Edgar Allan Poe. The story of William Wilson is built on surreal motifs and creates a character with split personality. The plot is about a boy named William Wilson who is slightly arrogant and bossy. All boys from the boarding school are sort of afraid of him, except for one, and that boy has the same name as William, same birthday, and even the same physical appearance. William hated the boy, seeing how defiant he was. He would meet the boy here and there later in life, especially in situations where the double would see through his bad intentions, thus belittling and endangering him. This leads to, when given the chance, William Wilson kills his double and sees the reflection of his wounded body in the mirror. The Yellow Wallpaper is a short story written by Charlotte Perkins Gilman in which the narrator describes her stay in a colonial mansion which her husband John has secured for her through a 3-month rental because she's suffering from postpartum depression. Her husband isolates and confines her in the mansion and in a nursery that has hideous yellow wallpaper. The narrator explores the yellow wallpaper and tells her husband that she has been noticing a pattern in different shade of yellow behind the wallpaper's front design, which she believes is a sub-pattern of a woman who creeps and shakes the yellow wallpaper's front pattern as if the latter is behind bars. The narrator sees the woman creep outside the mansion during the day and remain behind the wallpaper's front pattern at night. In her last days of confinement, the narrator locks herself inside the nursery and tears the wallpaper to get the woman out. The Metamorphosis is a story written by Franz Kafka about a man named Gregor Samsa who is a traveling salesman and who one day wakes up in the morning and discovers that he has transformed into a giant insect-like vermin. He realizes that he has missed his train and gets acquainted with his awkward new body as he worries about his stressful salesman job. His mother, his father, and his sister Gret realizes something's amiss and knock at his door, but he finds that he cannot produce human speech and also cannot open the door. Once he confronts his family, he realizes that his family is shocked by the appearance and they're embarrassed of him and they want to get rid of him. Gregor resolves to help his family deal with the trouble he's causing by his metamorphosis. Gregor overhears the family talking about their finances, determining that they will have to go to work since Gregor can no longer provide for them. Gregor feels upset and sorry that he cannot support them anymore. Gradually, he realizes that his family is ignoring him and they're keeping him isolated and hidden so that no one discovers that this is Gregor. Soon, at one time, Gregor sees that his father has become a rich man and he feels sad that he was supposed to be the one who was the provider, but he cannot do it anymore. One day, his father injures him, and after a month passes and Gregor recovers from his injury, his family members are exhausted from working and Gregor feels neglected. Soon, after many incidents, Gregor believes that Gregor has ruined their lives, and Gregor feebly returns to his room, injured by his father again, thinks of his family with love, and dies. So I want to begin with 3 famous aspects of Freudian philosophy, which are the id, the ego, and the superego. So as we all know, id is basically the pleasure principle and entirely unconscious, whereas the ego is the reality principle, which represents some reason but it lacks strong vitality and is largely unconscious. And lastly, superego is the morality principle that represses and stops the drive of the id by censoring one's desires and creating guilty feelings, and it is unconscious. So if we want to relate this to the very first story of ours, which is the William Wilson story, we can say that in William Wilson, The id and the ego is the physical, the original William Wilson, which is governed by the pleasure principles, by the primal instincts and the primal urges, whereas the double William Wilson, which is the splitting image of William Wilson, is the superego, which which basically governs the original William Wilson with morals, with ethics, and it tries to repress and stop the drive of the physical William Wilson, whose drives are heinous and the desires are vile. Secondly, if we move on to the second story, we can say that in this case, the female protagonist, from her superego, or rather ego image, the character is spiraling into the id tendencies and the primal urges. So there is definitely a sexual factor present and the potential for aggression. So these things are very much relevant to the id tendencies of primal urges. So the wallpaper, the person in the wallpaper definitely has aggressive thoughts, and once the character sort of breaks free of the psychological barriers and gives herself to her original form, we know that the id tendencies and the primal thoughts and the primal urges has fully taken over her. And as we move on, in the case of the Metamorphosis, this representation is very, very unique and different, because in this representation, in Metamorphosis, these three concepts are sort of personified. So the character of Mrs. Samsa can be said to represent the Freudian concept of id. So basically, she follows her instincts all the time. She follows her urges all the time. She's governed by that part of her brain because she's loving and sympathetic. She's grateful to Gregor's efforts to fix the family's debt. But when she first sees Gregor as an insect, she gets scared. She falls into the arms of Mr. Samsa, but she continues to go with her motherly instincts and always feels sick when she sees Gregor. But when Mr. Samsa and Greet try to kill Gregor, she stops them. So Mrs. Samsa can be said to follow the Freudian concept of id. And as we move on, Mr. Samsa can be said to represent Gregor's superego, because Mr. Samsa, after Gregor's own transformation or own metamorphosis, Mr. Samsa goes through his own metamorphosis, and he becomes a very well-dressed businessman who wears even his business clothes at home, and he sort of reminds everyone that yes, I am the man of the house. So Mr. Samsa also wants to prove that Mrs. Samsa belongs to him and him only, going back, which I will discuss further, that going back to the Oedipus complex. So Mr. Samsa sort of throughout the novella conveys himself as merciless and angry towards Gregor. So we can say that Mr. Samsa becomes a source of Gregor's guilt and thus can represent Gregor's superego. And so the only missing part is the ego, which we can say was Gret. And Gret is, before Gregor's metamorphosis, Gret was weak and was dependent and relied on her brother, and they had a very strong relationship. But eventually she became more independent and she became less grateful towards Gregor. So instead of helping him, she wanted to kill him because she thought it was the right thing to do. and because she felt like that was the thing that she had to do. So from a Freudian standpoint, we can say that she represents the ego, because she doesn't immediately follow her instinct to stop helping Gregor. She does what is socially appropriate, or what she thinks is expected of her. So I've discussed the three aspects of Freudian philosophy in reference to my three short stories, and Metamorphosis is a novella. But now I'll move forward to other concepts that are present, that are dispersed along the Freudian concepts that are dispersed along the three texts. Since I wanted to basically focus on identity for this assignment, I delved more into the id, the ego, and the superego. So now I'm just going to brush through some of the other Freudian philosophies that are present in the three short stories. And one significant one is the Oedipus complex in Metamorphosis. So in Metamorphosis, we can see that Gregor Samsa basically replaces his father as the family's provider. And there is a tension rising between the father and the son, because these two characters are attributed to fighting for Mrs. Samsa's love and affection. So we can say that during the phallic stage of psychosexual development, Gregor subconsciously wishes to replace his father and win his mother's affection. And in the future, he is able to do that. So there is the Oedipal complex that is actually very significantly present in the short story Metamorphosis. Another aspect which sort of has been brushed through is the dream theory, which basically represents that dreams are not coincidental, but they have manifest and latent content. So the dream theory is also talked about in this short story. The other theories which are present is the one of the double, which is the splitting in psychology, the black and white thinking, or the all or nothing thinking, which is a very common defense mechanism, and that is very protrudingly present in William Wilson, because the entire concept is itself talking about the splitting of William Wilson himself. So in the Yellow Wallpaper, it's more or less a very complicated story about as I said before, the characters' descent into id tendencies. So in this short story, there's also a sort of battle between both the states that are present. And I believe these are some important aspects that are other than the identity factor present in the three short stories. So I believe this will be the end of my video. Please do forgive me for any shortcomings, because this is actually my first time editing a video, and most of the photos that are present here are probably not of that great quality, but I would really be happy if you can provide some feedback. And also, it has been an amazing experience talking about something that I'm really passionate about, because I chose Edgar Allan Poe because he's my favorite writer, and Franz, Kafka, and Charlotte Perkins Gilman, these stories did put an impact on me. So I hope this has been good journey towards the psychoanalysis of William Wilson by Edgar Allan Poe, Charlotte Perkins Gilman's The Yellow Wallpaper, and The Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka. Thank you so much.